All right, we are inviting Zipporah Peddle to talk to us about CCM styles, singing and teaching, CCM and musical theater. And I think we got it now. I can hear you.
Hi there, how are you?
How are you?
Great.
It's,
We had a snow week last week,
oh
so
my,
it was just
I know,
crazy.
going crazy. Oh goodness, this light, I'm trying to figure out my light situation here. I usually do these in the middle of the day. Let's see, I'm going to turn this down. That's a little aggressive. There we go. Okay, perfect. Cool. All right. Well, welcome. Thank you for joining me. I really appreciate it.
It's
You're
so nice to catch up with you.
I know, I know. Even if it's through Instagram Live, that's just how it goes these days. Well, thank you. We are interviewing Zipporah about teaching and singing CCM styles, and I really wanted to reach out to Zipporah because I think that her background is very similar to a lot of the people I know that follow me here on Instagram. A lot of us are classically trained, and then suddenly we find ourselves in the real world teaching and sometimes singing CCM styles or musical theater styles that we haven't really been trained in. So a lot of us have had to learn on the fly. And so I kind of wanted to talk to you about that, how you made that transition, and maybe advice that you have for people that are finding themselves in similar situations. But first, I would love to ask you an icebreaker question. We have one to ask you from Stephanie. So she asks you, what's your favorite show or the best show that you've ever seen live?
Oh, wow. Gosh, that's really tough for me. I am such a theater junkie and I've seen a lot of good stuff. Um, I saw a really beautiful version of Satyagraha at LA Opera a few years ago, which I still think of regularly. It was just so incredibly directed, beautiful. But some of the Broadway stuff that I've seen, I saw Bernadette Peters and Gypsy.
Oh,
Um, it was like a master class in how to do that
oh,
material. I mean, just
I,
amazing.
yeah, that is amazing. Yeah, and you lived in Las Vegas for a while, so I'm sure that you saw so many shows come through there when you lived there as well, huh?
I've seen a lot of really fantastic pop rock artists. I've seen all the Cirque shows, which of course is a whole different kind of genre
Yeah,
into its own, but I'm a junkie for that, and it's been really hard the past year, actually. Yeah.
totally. Yeah, yeah, I know. Um, So if you guys are just joining us, I see some of you have joined us. Go ahead and feel free to ask questions as we go along. We are talking about teaching and singing CCM styles, musical theater styles, especially if you have a classical background. Don't be afraid to ask questions. That's what we're here to talk about today. All right, well, let's jump in. And so the first thing I want to ask you is how about your background. How did tell us whatever you want to about how you got started in this industry. And then specifically, I'd love to hear what we've been talking about, how your training started, and then how you transitioned to more of a CCM bent. I know that's not all you do. I know you also do opera and classical stuff. So I'm not saying that you've pigeonhole yourself into one style, but I know that's part of your story, and I'd love to hear about that.
Yeah, I definitely came up in a generation when classical vocal technique was the only thing really being taught where I lived. I loved musical theater when I was growing up, but I was taught to sing it in a very classical way, and that was the technique that was taught again where I lived. And so when I decided to go to university and do a Bachelor of Music in classical voice, it really was my love of music. And don't get me wrong, I love classical music. I love opera. But I never wanted to pursue a career in it. I just always knew in my heart that wasn't my truest, strongest passion, if you
Sure.
will. Um, but I did a degree in classical voice. I then spent 2 years at Sheridan College in Toronto, which is, it's really the best musical theater program that we have in Canada. And even there, I loved going to Sheridan, but even there was very much this idea that there were belters and there were sopranos, and never the twain shall meet. You either naturally could do one or the other, and there really wasn't training in how to cross over if you wanted to do that. There were a handful of singers who could, but it was sort of looked at like they were, freaks of nature somehow. And, they were able to do this mysterious thing, right? They were able to sing in their chest voice and also have these beautiful soprano moments. And it was just like a thing they were able to do naturally somehow. So I left there. I started auditioning. I quickly realized there was a lot of work that I would get hired to do in musical theater, in all kinds of different CCM genres. And Caitlin, I'm telling you, it was like trial by fire. I literally learned.
Well, I think that's a lot of us, right? Like we find ourselves in those situations. We're like, well, let's see what happens.
Girl, it was not pretty sometimes. I really taught myself how to do it on the job. And, I would get hired, like my first cruise contract as a production singer. I was cruise ships knows those shows have everything in them, right? They've got pop, rock, Broadway, country and Western, like you name it, right? You're just doing just the full gamut. And I taught myself how to do it. And I watched other singers and I tried to figure out how they were doing what they were doing. It was really hard. And my North Star as a teacher now is that I never want my students to go through what I went through, because you don't need to, right? There's no need. I want to give my students the tools they need to sing in the styles they want to sing in, and to feel good about that, and to feel like they're ready and they're prepared and they've got that foundation that they need to be successful, Okay, I'll try and be quick. So
we're good. Yeah. We'll just be here all night. Okay.
Yeah, exactly. Get your glass of wine. So I was singing professionally for a while. I got hired to sing for Cirque du Soleil. So I moved to Las Vegas. I did my master's while I was there. And I really started getting more and more interested in how exactly do you teach this stuff, right? It can't be a mystery. Some people teach it. Some people know how to do it. Somebody's got to know how to do it, right?
Right.
And that was really where my journey began, into exploring not just how do I produce this sound, but how do I help other people produce this sound.
Yes.
And so I did a lot of continuing education. We met at Shenandoah, CCM Institute. I studied Jeannie LeVetre's work and Lisa Popeil's work and Elizabeth Howard and a lot of these people, who really are the pioneers, right, of how we teach this. Mary Saunders Barton and Norm Spivey, they have been, they don't know it, right? I've never told them this, but it was so fundamentally changed how I teach, and I've really immersed myself in those styles in musical theater, vocal pedagogy and pop rock pedagogy. And I'm starting to feel like I'm getting a handle on it finally.
I think so. I mean, you've spent quite a bit of time in it and you've performed professionally. So I'm sure at the time it didn't feel like you, like all of us, we kind of, like you were saying, trial by fire, right? You start out and you're like, what am I doing? But as time goes on and that experience happens, then you learn your technique and your methods one way or another, which you have done now purposefully attending these things. And we'll talk about that later, about things that you might recommend singers do if they're trying to learn more about studying these styles. Stephanie is asking which Cirque show, wow, that was hard to say, were you in?
I was in O at the Bellagio for 6 years, and it was one of my career highlights. I can't say enough about how much I loved that experience, and just getting to go to work every night and watch contortionists and clowns and acrobats, and it was very magical, and I really loved it. And I learned, I mean, I had done other long-term gigs, but never 6 years. I mean, you learn about consistency and how to maintain.
So how many nights were you performing when you were doing that?
We did 2 hour and 45-minute shows a night for 5 nights a week. So, it's a lot. And and it's tough, you know, it's, you go through times when you're sick, when you're not sleeping, when you're whatever, right?
Yeah,
And so you learn how to take care of yourself, how to prioritize your voice.
absolutely.
And you know, it was, I learned a lot on that show, actually. I learned a lot about myself on that show.
Right. Oh, I bet. Oh man,
Yeah.
that's so. And then you went on to sing for cruise ships after that, or was that before?
I sang for cruise ships before that. So I had
Okay.
worked for a few different companies. I had done some guest entertaining as well. And then I worked as a vocalist supervisor for Princess for three
Right.
years before I took my first academic position. And so, so I've just kind of been in a lot of different sort of aspects of the business. I've
Sure.
gigged with bands, and I don't know, I've just done like, I've done a lot of like the weddings. I've done all of that stuff, right? So
Yeah. And so when you went in back and vocal coached for Princess, did you did you always want to be a teacher? Was that part of what you thought you were going to do, or was that something that you kind of came back to and realized that you liked or enjoyed?
yeah, I taught on and off through the years, mostly out of necessity, if I'm totally frank with you.
Absolutely.
I'd be between gigs and I'm okay, I'll teach for a while until I get another gig. I just wanted to sing so much, and that was really where my heart was.
Mhm.
And, and, my mentor at UNLV when I did my master's was Dr. Todd Fitzpatrick.
Mhm.
And I'm sure he would laugh at me if he heard me say this now, because I remember him asking if I ever wanted to teach. And I was like, I'm never, not full time. No, no, no.
Yeah.
I'll do a few students on the side, and, you know, but the more I learned about these genres, the more I got into clarifying for myself exactly what was happening and what needed to happen and how to communicate that. I have fallen in love with that, with sharing that. I don't want it just for myself. I want to share it with people. I want to help young singers achieve their goals, and so my passion has totally changed. I absolutely love teaching,
Mhm.
and I find it very, very rewarding. And so that's, what can I say? I'm a hypocrite. I've
Hey, I don't think you're the only one. I think that's very telling because some people they'll teach and they realize they really don't like it. So I mean the fact that you did that and then realized that it was a passion of yours, I mean that's a great clue that you're doing what you're meant to do at this point in your life because now you're at Missouri State and that's kind of your full-time gig now, right? Teaching CM and musical theater styles.
Yes. So Bob Westenberg is our MT coordinator, and he is a visionary. He's a Broadway veteran, and he's got his finger on the pulse of what's happening in the musical theater industry. And he realized that they needed to be training their singers in CCM styles. It's just not avoidable anymore.
Right.
If you're a musical theater performer and you want to perform anything that's been produced in the past 20 years, you have to have an understanding of these styles. And so he brought me in, and I created a program for them, which, covers a lot of the things that I have learned, right, over the past 10 years, stylistically, pedagogy, kind of the full gamut. And so I teach musical theater students primarily how to incorporate CCM into their musical theater kind of book, if you will, or catalog.
Yeah, great. Yeah, Stephanie is asking what is CCM? That's a really great question. I didn't know this because I grew up in the Christian school circuit, so I always thought like CCM was Christian contemporary Christian music, but it's actually now stands well. There are different definitions of CCM, but it's contemporary commercial music is what we're talking about when we talk about CCM, and there's a whole nother discussion to be had there about delineations. We are just throwing this blanket term over all kinds of music, over rock, pop. I mean, some people even include musical theater in that. It's kind
Mm-hmm.
of a separate thing, but it's just contemporary styles of singing, and it's delineated from the classical styles of singing that we teach. Yeah. Good question. Those of you that are just joining us, feel free to ask questions. We're talking about teaching these CCM styles, these contemporary styles of singing and musical theater. And Zipporah is a great resource for that because she was trained classically and then kind of crossed over into the CCM world. And as she's talking about, has created this program at Missouri State about teaching this. We met at Shenandoah Conservatory's CCM Vocal Pedagogy Institute. I attended because I felt like my background was all classical and I was starting to teach students in the CCM style, and I didn't know a whole lot about that. And so that's where Zipporah and I met. She was also attending at the same time. And like I said, she was my first choice when I wanted someone to come and talk to us about this today. So I'm so glad that she's joining us. Oh, great. So let's get into kind of the nitty gritty here. The first thing I want to talk about are the similarities between teaching classically and teaching or singing CCM styles. So are there similarities between the two? You know, we have a lot of people say, oh, you can sing classically, you can sing any style, which maybe we'll debunk that myth a little bit later on. But are there similarities between these two styles?
Look, you know, I don't think anyone should throw the baby out with the bathwater. I use a lot of exercises, you know, by Richard Miller, Janice Chapman, right? I mean, all kinds, Ken Bozeman. I love Ken Bozeman's work. Like, there's a lot of classical teachers that I, you know, that it's good. They're good exercises. It's a good approach. There is nothing wrong with it, right? It's like, and I think part of what bugs me sometimes when we talk about like sort of classical versus CCM, is this idea that it has to be binary. Like there has to be like, it's this way or that way. And one of them has to be good and one of them has to be bad. And that's just not
Right,
true, you
right,
know?
exactly. One of the things that really struck me at the CCM Vocal Pedagogy Institute was neglecting the judgment of good and bad when you're talking about singing. Like, don't even use those words, right? Like, it's not. It doesn't. I mean, maybe vocal health, right?
Yeah.
Maybe you don't want to sing a certain way because it will make you lose your voice and go hoarse and have vocal damage. Maybe you can sing good and bad in those circumstances, but other than that, it's just style choices. It's just different ways of using your voice, different colors that you can make. Um, yeah, that's really interesting. So now let's talk a little bit about these differences. What are the major differences in teaching classically? And we just said it's not binary. I understand that.
Mm-hmm.
But in your understanding, what are some of the differences that you've come across when teaching these different styles and the way that you were trained?
I think the biggest difference is that, you know, classical vocal pedagogy has hundreds of years of this tradition of how we teach it.
Mm-hmm.
And so even if you study with different teachers, they will probably, for the most part, and I know this is also debatable. I know everything is so debatable in our world, but they will agree on certain things. This is how we approach respiration. This is how we should be phonating. This is how our articulation should be. You know, like the main things that we think about, they will have a similarity, a similar idea about how those things should be approached. When you get into, I don't think of musical theater and CCM as the same. When you think of musical theater and then CCM styles, you start to run into problems in terms of saying everybody has to sound like this. Because, you know, CCM artists, many of them are songwriters, but the music is something that is a very personal expression, and there's really no right or wrong. When you talk about something like tone or timbre, there's no right or wrong, right? Is Stevie Wonder right? And I don't know, Taylor Swift is wrong. Like,
Right.
who is right? There are just so many differences. And in terms of how we approach the breath, it's very different. Registration's a big one. I adjudicate musical theater competitions, and I see a lot of singers, young women, who really don't know what is expected if they sing a song like History of Wrong Guys, right?
Right. Right.
Like you can't sing that in your head register. You just
Mm-hmm.
can't. It's not appropriate. And so there's things like that that I think really don't cross over. Um, but but for me, it's less about like excluding things, or like it's about creating. And I know this is an analogy a lot of people use, but like you have little toolboxes, right? So when
Mhm.
I'm in the classical toolbox, these are the things that I'm going to do. And if I'm in
Right.
musical theater, if I'm in operetta, or if I'm in golden age drama or musical comedy or a rock musical, these are the things I will pull from. If I'm in, doing a CCM song, is it a rock song? Is it gospel? Is it country? Is it, hip hop, right? They all have their own they all have similarities that you can sort of generalize, right? Even though
Right.
there will be differences between artists,
Sure.
but you can for the most part, you can find, okay, generally speaking, in a pop song from the late 50s, I'm going to hear these things,
Right.
right? And so I think that's a big thing. And I know I'm sort of skipping a little bit because we're going to talk about what people can do for themselves to start to transition.
Yeah.
But the more you clarify for yourself those things, right? The actual things we do when we sing are the same. We all have the same parts, right?
Yeah.
We're all breathing. That breath is moving through our vocal folds, through a vocal tract that is shaped a certain way, right? And so then it's clarifying, how am I using all of those different pieces depending on the style that I'm in.
Exactly. And I think, yeah, I mean, I think that's a huge challenge with people that teach CCM and musical theater, is you have to be adept at all of those styles and understand. But I guess we do the same thing in the classical world, right? Like we know that singing Baroque music is we pull from different traditions. We know that there's ornamentation involved versus singing something from the classical period, which there might be some ornamentation, but not like the Baroque period. And then you got the Romantic period where you want to use those portamenti. So it's the same thing, but it's
Mm-hmm.
just being very well versed in those different styles and knowing when it's appropriate to use that, right?
And Caitlin, if I can say something, like for anyone now who's sitting at home thinking, oh my God, I'm never going to do this because it's so much. Like the reason we feel so insecure about it is because we're not taught how to do it or how to teach it, right?
Exactly.
And then where do you get your information from? You feel confident teaching classical music because that is the tradition you've been taught in. Well, guess
Exactly.
what? You can just as easily learn how to teach in these other traditions. And, I really highly recommend, like, instead of feeling overwhelmed by all the things, pick a thing, right? Just be like, okay, I can't do all the things right now, but how
Yeah.
about if I figure out, like, pop? What is a pop sound? What does that entail? Can I start maybe teaching some pop repertoire? And then, okay, I've been doing that for a while. I'm starting to feel okay. What about rock? What is that? What would that look like if I added that into the mix, right? Just it's a process. We're all still on this sort of road, I myself, some days I feel like I'm like, I know everything. And then other days I'm like, I know nothing. I literally have nothing to offer anyone. you
No,
know?
if you ever study with someone who says they know everything, you should run away because because we don't. No one knows everything. There's so much out there. Yeah, that's great advice because I know I felt that same way and I still feel that same way. It is very overwhelming when you're teaching just in other styles and trying to start that or singing in other styles and you're just starting this journey, just to feel like there's so much out there. And there is so much out there, but good.
Mm-hmm.
Just picking one thing and trying that out, using the skills that maybe you did learn in music school of active listening and trying to start to mimic some of those sounds and seeing what that feels like, seeing if you can start to notice some similarities in, like, for instance, in pop music or in country music. What are they doing? Oh, there's a lot of cry in that. And
Mm-hmm.
just starting to notice that so that when maybe one day when you start teaching it, you can start to have a little bit more stylistic vocabulary, I guess, is a good way to say that.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
It's and part of what helped me a lot also was identifying the things that are easy to apply with
Sure.
students and the things that are going to take more time,
Sure.
right? Cry is a great example. That
Mm,
cry, whine, sob, oh no, that sound, we have all been whining at our parents since we were children, right?
right.
we know how to make that sound. And when students tap into that, it can be really useful in CCM styles, but also relatively easy to apply.
That's a good point.
Um, Whereas something like I've taught a lot of sopranos how to start using their chest voice. And again, I was that person, right, who
Right.
did that myself.
Right.
That can be incredibly scary at first, but most people find it really fun when they start to get into it.
Yeah.
But it takes time. That is not something that like 2 lessons and you're going to have, you know, this, you're going to be belting whatever. It takes time. And so I think also like managing expectations with your student can help with that, you know,
Right.
and being like, we can now explore straight tone versus vibrato, because as a trained singer, you're probably someone who can do that. You can add, you know, you can straight tone or you can add the vibrato, or maybe we'll have a little bit of both.
Right.
That can be something that can be easy to apply.
Right.
And then these are the things we're going to work on kind of long term to see how we can, you know, build from there.
Yeah. Oh, that's great. Yeah, that's a really good idea. Great. Let's talk about, okay, my next question. I am excited about this. Any myths you want to bust about singing or teaching CCM?
Yeah, I mean, I I have a big problem with the idea that a sound in one tradition is beautiful and a sound in another tradition is not. You know, and this is something this actually sort of is in line with a lot of the diversity and inclusion conversations we're having these days, right? Classical music, as much as we love it, it came out of a very Western, you know, European tradition. It is one cultural tradition. There are I mean, CCM music is indigenous to America. You know, we have our own forms here that grew, right, in this country. Um, and it's important, I think, also as an aside, if you're going to teach this, I think you need to know the history of it, right? The history of where did the blues come from? Where does jazz come from? All of those styles.
Right.
But, you know, the idea that one sound is beautiful and one sound is not, I think that all the sounds have a place,
Yes.
and especially if you're an actor, right? The sound, you know, we're performers, we're interpreters, we're storytellers. What is the appropriate sound for this moment? It's not always going to be the what we're used to in terms of, you know, a resonant, beautiful, long legato line with lots of vibrato, right? That's a beautiful thing for certain moments, but it's not always going to be what we want. So there's that. I think this is something that, you know, I don't even know if people believe this anymore, but some people used to think that pop rock singing was not healthy or couldn't be healthy. There are certainly people who sing pop rock who are not healthy. But there's also lots of singers who have had amazing CCM careers and still sing. Aretha Franklin, you know, Celine Dion. There's just so many. I mentioned Stevie Wonder. Like, there's so many singers. Like Bruce Springsteen. I just saw Bruce Springsteen on Saturday Night Live. Right? There's no. You take care of your voice, whatever genre you're singing in. You know.
Exactly.
Um, yeah, I don't know. I mean, it's again, I think also, and you already mentioned this a little bit, is the idea that all the styles are the same, you know, that all the CCM is exactly the same way like all the musical theater is all the same.
Right.
And it's just not. It's just
No.
not. There's crossover, there's similarities in certain ways, but again, clarifying for yourself. And I can give you some resources that have helped me at the end to help you clarify those different styles or what we expect to hear in those different styles.
Sure. And I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but I would like to know what you think about that phrase that we do hear a lot, that if you can sing classically, you can sing anything. Is that true or false?
It it is false.
Yeah.
I'll just leave it at that. It's false. No, I love classical music. A friend of mine was performing in Mozart's Requiem a couple of nights ago. And I'm just like, oh my God, this is so sublime. How would anyone want to listen to or do anything other than this, right? Like, I love it. But classical music trains you to produce a sound which is not amplified. The reason that that technique evolved was so that your voice would carry right over the orchestra so you would fill the hall. Amplification has completely changed our relationship with the voice, and and also the stylistic traditions that came out of America, in the late 1800s, early 1900s. And so if you're not willing to sort of at least try to embrace some of that, some of the differences, then you're not going to authentically or effectively sing it.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Good. I just wanted to say that because I think that out there that you learn classical and you can sing whatever you want. Classical is great, but I just don't think that's true. And we have to realize that what you were saying earlier is classical music comes from a place of privilege, and that was just like that was taught for a very long time and is still taught in a lot of places. This is the right way to sing. This is the correct way to sing. If you learn to sing this way, you can sing anything. But that's not true. That's a genre just like anything else. You're learning to sing a particular genre, a particular style. And with that, I think that classical music can teach you to sing in a very healthy manner, but you can also learn to sing in a healthy manner in other styles. It's not the healthiest way to sing either. I think that sometimes that judgment is made, and that's not necessarily true. Anyways, I have to say that.
I will say that I think it's closer for men or AMAB, people who identify or assign male at birth. I think that it's easier for them to transition between styles. Because even though in CCM styles, I always teach the men that I teach, I always teach them to use their falsetto and how to, transition. Yes. But predominantly, they're still going to be singing in their chest register typically. And that's a big thing, right? That's a big deal. That's a big difference between women trying to transition between styles or from classical to contemporary styles and men. So I do think that transition is easier for men.
Yes.
God, everything is easier for them. I'm just kidding. No, but it's just functionally, like, I think it's easier. It can take a little bit less time to learn to transition.
Absolutely. Yeah, I think you're right. I think there's a lot of similarities between like teaching tenors and teaching belt.
Mm-hmm.
It's similar in a lot of ways. Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. But that's what I mean, Caitlin, like the fact that you're able to identify that, right? And then, okay, I lean into this. Like, I know how to do this, right? I'm like, and so it's like, those are the moments when you have these like, oh my God, that's brilliant. Like,
right. Yeah. And we'll get into this now, but I think there's a lot of this study of CCM music and musical theater styles that's pedagogy specifically that's very new. So again, if you're feeling overwhelmed by this, like, oh my gosh, there's no way I can learn all of this, there are resources that we're about to talk about. So if you're a classical singer wanting to learn more about this, it's out there, and you already have some of the tools, and there are more things that you can do now if you want to start learning about how to sing and teaching these styles. So let's talk about advice that you would give singers with more classical leaning backgrounds wanting to learn more about teaching or singing in CCM or musical theater styles. Where would you point these people?
Sure. So sometimes I've had conversations with my colleagues or friends who are classical singers. They've been teaching classical music for a long time. And they're just like, I just don't like this. Like, I don't like Billie Eilish. I don't want to listen to it. It's not my jam. That's fair enough. I always push back though, because I really believe we all have a connection, an emotional connection to some kind of CCM music from some time in our lives somewhere, right? For me, we always had ABBA albums around the house when I was little. My mom and I would sing Take Me Home Country Roads and Meatloaf when we were on road trips, So we have those things. It's like the song that was, your first dance at your wedding or whatever it is. There's something in the history of this music that you connect with. And so it's really good to start there. You don't have to want to listen to Billie Eilish. That's fine. You don't have to love the same music your students love, but I do think you have to be open. You have to have a little bit of like a beginner's mind or a childlike curiosity of, well, like, what if, if I like this music? What if,
Sure.
So start by listening, find the time when you're driving to work or something, just pop in a couple of songs, you know, songs again that remind you of when you were little or something that have a positive memory for you. Um, start start singing that music. And I highly, highly recommend that you book some lessons with a teacher who teaches this one of these styles, who specializes in either musical theater or CCM, whatever you're interested in. Because you know, I get a lot of exercises from books. Like I'm constantly reading and stealing people's exercises and stuff for my lessons. But working with somebody one-on-one, you really get more of a sense of exactly what they're looking for, you know, and okay, well that like resonance choices and I don't know, just you get into more of sort of the nitty-gritty of it. So book some lessons, make the sounds, right? And try to stay open to it. Try to stay open to what that is, you know. I also really recommend, and this is partly because I've done so much of it myself. I highly recommend researching in whatever, however you can. If you can go to, if your like lifestyle or whatever allows you to go to some of the summer vocal pedagogy programs, there's some really good ones out right now. We mentioned Shenandoah. I did Boston Conservatories last summer. It was great, excellent. The Jeannie Levetri has one at Baldwin Wallace. There's just like a bunch of those now that are happening, and a lot more of those teachers, a lot more of, again, those foundational teachers are offering online workshops during the year. So if that's something that like fits into your life and you can afford, I recommend that because again, you're hearing it from the horse's mouth. You're getting that information directly from them.
Right. And also, we were saying earlier about online lessons is even if you can't afford those institutes, even seeing who those teachers are and reaching out to them and asking about online lessons that either they can teach or if they can recommend someone to teach you. I think that would be a great resource as well.
Absolutely. And then in terms of your like research using books, I guess that's something that's a lot more accessible for a lot of people. There are so many good books out now, and it's getting better and better every year, right? What we have available is getting better. I honestly can't say enough about Mary Saunders Barton and Norm Spivey's book, Cross Training in the Voice Studio. It changed how I teach. I love it. I think it's a great book, and it comes with video of her teaching those exercises. Yeah,
I'm gonna have to check that out.
You can access it online, so I think that's really great. Nats has some books out that they're all like the so you want to teach or so you want to sing. I especially love the gospel one in that series, and I love the blues and jazz ones in that series as well. Those are like my favorite kind of go-to books from that series. Gosh. Musical theater styles. If that's something that interests you, there's a book, I think it's called Acting in Musical Theater by Joe Deere and Rocco somebody, and I apologize for not remembering his last name. That book, it's primarily an acting textbook actually, but the last third of the book, it outlines exactly what operetta style is, what we're looking for in vocal delivery in operetta, and then it goes on to GNS, and then it goes on to musical comedy, and you know, and so in terms of like clarifying for yourself, okay, this is what these are. I found that really, really helpful. And then, you know, there's a lot of like kind of textbooks, like rock history textbooks. Between you and me, Caitlin, since it's just the two of us, I find them a bit problematic. The books that I've been able to find that cover kind of the history of rock and roll are definitely written from a certain point of view with a certain voice. And I feel like other voices are maybe not as amplified in those books as they should be. And so I'm actively trying to find other sources to pull from because I'm teaching one of my courses now. We go through like era by era, the history of rock and roll. And that can be something too that you can do with your students. You know, it's like, hey, you know, everyone in the studio is going to do like a 50s song, and then we're going to do a 60s folk song, and then we're going to do a disco song, and then you can actually make that something that's sort of part of your curriculum. And as your students discover it, you're discovering it yourself, right? You're learning as you prep the lessons or as you prep your work with them, and then they're learning as well. And, you know, just, yeah, it's, you have to give yourself some grace and, you know, realize it's going to be a process, and that's okay. It's okay. I'm not an expert in every single thing that ever had to do with the voice ever, and that's okay. You know?
Yeah. Yeah, and I like the idea. It's so hard if you're in academia to add this as part of your curriculum, right? Because the schools a lot of times still have these things that you have to have done by the end of the year. You have to have 5 art songs or whatever. So it is really hard to find a way to incorporate this. But I like what you said about, you know, maybe having in your studio, having students, you know, research different topics and maybe present on that, or you know, just sing different styles in studio. And if you have a private studio, then that's a lot easier to implement on your own. But one thing I found when I did attend the CCM Vocal Pedagogy Institute is seeing those different styles opened up, you know, that, as you were saying earlier, I didn't grow up listening to classical music. I grew up I loved country music. I'm from Tennessee, so I loved listening to country music. I also, my aunt would play Carole King in the car every morning in first grade when I carpooled with my cousin. So I loved Tapestry. Like, that was my favorite album as a first grader, randomly. So like this kind of music, when I started singing this again for the first time in a while, and really kind of diving into it again, it reminded me of vocal freedom that I hadn't felt in a very long time. And that in turn affected my classical music, my classical singing again, which I still do. I sing classical music, and that's kind of my main gig still. But that allowed me to remember a connection that I had with music that I hadn't felt in quite some time. So I think there is an advantage, even if you are teaching mostly classical music, to have your students sing a style that they're maybe more comfortable with, more familiar with, maybe not academically as engaged in, but singing in those styles can really be beneficial in helping them to find vulnerability again, or sincerity again in their voice, which we can lose a lot if we just only focus on that one classical academic way of teaching or singing, right?
Well, I think there's two really interesting things sort of that I just thought of while you were talking about that. The first is that the way that we vocalize when we are emotionally connected to something like that, I think that's part of why I love CCM music so much, because we have a strong emotional connection to that music. And when we sing it, we are essentially doing a vocalization of the emotion, right? It's really, that's what makes that music feel authentic, right?
Yeah.
When Aretha Franklin does like, "Ah," right, we feel like she is giving us that emotional moment. We're sharing it with her, right? And so you're right. Students, especially when they're in an academic setting, who are very used to kind of a rigid way of going about learning music and everything, it can really help them access this part of themselves that they just maybe have closed the door on, right? And they're not accessing anymore. And then the other thing I wanted to say was that when you mentioned tapestry, so this is another thing that I think can be really helpful for singers who are primarily classically based, but then trying to transition, is like, don't pick the hardest Jessie J song,
Right.
right? Ariana Grande, like
Right.
riffing all over the place, crazy high belt. You know, there's a lot of music, especially earlier music. So like I mentioned 50s and 60s pop typically sits in like a smaller vocal range, right? A speech-like range can be really good for accessing your own speech-like approach to registration and to delivery. And then in the 60s, like you said, there's a lot of folk artists. Women actually in the 60s, when they were singing folk music, typically transitioned. They don't push their chest up higher like we hear with like a band like Heart, for example. But women will transition. Joan Baez and Joni Mitchell and all those great singers, right? And so if you're somebody who, for example, you've been playing around with your chest a little bit, right? You're getting to like maybe an F4, F
Yeah.
sharp 4, right? And then I want
Yeah.
to switch. Well, in that style of music, it's okay. I
Yeah.
can switch into more of a mixy head, and that's still going to be stylistically appropriate. And they use a little more vibrato then as well. So like I'm doing CCM, but I'm still kind of doing it. I'm taking some of the stuff from the classical training, you know.
Exactly. Yeah, that's a great idea. Yeah. Let me
Mm-hmm.
go back here because we had some comments. Singing sucks. Some of my favorite new music from students. suggestions. Yeah, so I think that's when you were talking about earlier. If you don't like Billie Eilish, you know, you can find something you like. Good. Stephanie says, have you heard of the podcast A History of Rock Music in 500 Songs by Andrew Hickey? Very dry but very fascinating. Yeah, I have,
Ah,
but that's a good resource.
yeah, cool. Thank you. I love that kind of stuff. I'm just a junkie for this kind of thing, and I'm always listening to voice teacher podcasts and
Yeah,
stuff.
like I know. Same with me. I'm like, what do I do for fun? I need to find podcasts about things other than music to listen to. Yeah. Well, great. Okay. If I think that's all that I want to talk about. If you have any questions, feel free to drop them in the comments as we're wrapping up here. But I think that we'll let Zipporah go. We've taken up a lot of her time today. It's so easy to just keep talking about this stuff. But I think that one of the biggest things that we can take away from tonight are there are resources out there. If you're interested in learning this kind of music, you know, I think Zipporah would probably be fine if you reached out to her. Yeah.
Mhm. Yep, of course. Yeah.
And yeah, there's resources, there's books, of course. There's lots online now that you can look up, of course. But definitely, I think one of the best things you can do is reach out to someone that does teach in this style. And I think the voice lessons thing is a really good idea. And yeah, I think there's this study of this kind of music is still pretty new. So there are sources that are becoming available. Oh, how could we book a lesson with you? So I think you could reach out again if you're talking about with me. You can reach out to me if you're talking about Zipporah. You can reach out to her on Instagram, or is there another way that you want people to reach out to you?
Yeah, my Instagram is at ZZ Voice. Maybe I'll put it in the chat here.
Yeah, go for it.
Um,
I'll put I'll put that when I post this video.
Great. Sorry, I'm like technology. I can only do one thing at a time. I'm typing. Just give me a second. There,
Yeah.
I think that came through.
Great. Yeah, she's a great resource. As I said, Zipporah has worked with, she sang for Cirque du Soleil for 6 years, and
Mhm.
also worked with Princess Cruise Lines, both singing and I think also teaching as well, and then is now at Missouri State teaching these styles. So she's a great resource for these styles if you're looking to learn more. Great. Okay. Zipporah, thank you so much for joining us. This has been great, and I really appreciate it. You're such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this, and I love seeing everything that you're up to. I love that you're one that goes to conferences and talks and gives master classes. You're doing it
You
much.
know, like from one voice nerd to another, right? I mean, I love it. I love this. I love all the conferences and all that stuff. It never feels like work to me. It always feels just like what we're supposed to be doing, you know? So,
Absolutely. Yeah.
yeah.
Well, thank you. I'll see you around on social media, I'm sure. Great.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Good night.
Bye.